some of the research that's been done on the root causes. So what's interesting is that there's at least two things that the context of the election really speak to that would bump up the elections. And we kind of know this intuitively, right? When there's one or more propositions on a ballot, it tends to be that, you know, there's more turnout. And certainly when those propositions are sexy, like marijuana, you know, gay marriage, we know that the heightened conversation around those initiatives will also drive turnout. Whichever way you fall on, people are coming out to vote for the issue that they care about. The second thing is that when you have a large number of candidates, particularly who are designated, who the public sees as being competitive, that matters. Problem is that too often media and others, you know, we start looking at who's raised the most money, and I know we all do it, right? But what happens is then it sort of, even if there's a number of candidates, the conversation devolves into, well, there's one front runner, so why talk about it anyways? So clearly, the number of candidates drives up election contests by a little bit. So researchers have said anywhere between 4% to 5% of registrants can, you can see a bump up when you have more competitive candidates running. Other things also impact. If a city is larger, it tends to have a lower turnout. If a city has residents with higher socioeconomic status, like a lot of cities in Northern California, they tend to have higher voter turnout. When you look at cities that have a large Asian American or Latino population, tend to have lower turnout. A lot of cities in Southern California, particularly in LA County, that's what we're about. Why is that? Part of it is because of the citizenship issue, sort of the newness to voting, right? But also the language barriers. As a context, LA County is 27% white, we're 48% Latino, 14% Asian American, and 9% African American. That high percentage of Latino and Asian Americans, it's correlated to low voter turnout. Now, we can change that dynamic, but it means investing in talking to those very voters, the people who are most likely to not be talked to by the campaigns, and making a concerted effort. The method of election really matters as well. So this question about whether or not cities have in-district or at-large districts, a lot of studies have shown that when you have at-large districts, people feel distant. And a lot of cities in LA County are at-large districts, or at-large voting. Even in cities that have districts, like Los Angeles City, they're gigantic districts, right? They're ones where one person is representing 250,000 people. So there's a sense of distance between the person and their elected, and that contributes to it. You don't feel like you have a connection to the person that you can cast a ballot for. And lastly, the one thing that we looked at, of all those things, right, that would have a huge impact on voter turnout, was this question about when elections are scheduled. And it's crazy, because we looked at, well, what if we just moved city elections to the odd year, and then people would get into this habit of voting on June and November of any year? And again, studies showed that if you put the city elections to the even year, you could see a bump up of 21 to 36%. Now, here's how it matters for the state elections, because I know this is a question that you all are asking, right? In Los Angeles County, we are the single county, and I'll point you to the statistic if you just take a look at the executive summary in this report that I just passed out, right? This is the one county where we have the most number of cities, 78, that have elections off cycle. Okay? Every other county pretty much has consolidated their city elections with their state elections. Okay, so what does that mean? When you've got a limited budget for outreach to talk about things, okay, so Dean Logan has a budget of $250,000, which sounds like a lot, but for a huge county like LA, when you've got to tell voters, oh, there's an election on March 3rd, and then there's an election on April 3rd, and then there's an election on July, and another one, you're dissipating that little bit of outreach money across a lot of elections. You're tiring voters out, you're confusing them, and at some point, a lot of voters, the people who are least likely to vote, just start tuning it all out. Right, so if we consolidated it, not only would it help turnout for city elections, but even for statewide, I pose that if you want a good program for outreach, buying radio ads, putting messages on Amber Alerts, on Amber Alert boards, putting out a really creative outreach program, it helps if you're talking about a single election day and a single registration period that leads up to that. So, you all know where I stand on Amendments 1 and 2. I don't need to belabor that. That's not what today's hearing is about. Let me talk about solutions. I do think that it is important for us to dedicate some thinking to voter education and outreach. And as I mentioned before, LA County got $250,000 to spend on outreach, but it's the biggest county, it's the most populous county, it's the most diverse county. We have the most languages to cover. Geographically, we've got this gigantic spread, and we've got the most elections scheduled in a single year. So how can we concentrate those efforts and give more money to support LA County to be able to do a good job? I think that's a big question, and if I had that question posed to me, how would I spend 3 times the budget? At least a big portion of it would be, let's do really good outreach, and let's focus on the populations that tend not to turn out. Secondly, I think that we should give our voters more voting options. So I'm in love with the idea of voting centers that are open before Election Day. A lot of other states have tried it. Early voting, in-person voting is wildly popular, right? It wasn't popular when we tried it out earlier on in pre-2007, but after 2008, when Obama made it into a strategy, it's become a thing, right? And that's exactly when we stopped doing early voting in person, right? But we can do that in LA County. The law allows it. It's a matter of both money and getting the right equipment, right? But we can do that. And I think that when you combine that with the idea that Senator Hertzberg has brought up about possibly mailing to everybody just a ballot, why not? You combine that with the idea of adding some drop-off centers, because a lot of people in LA and throughout the state, they like getting their vote-by-mail ballot, but they also like physically putting it somewhere that feels like it's secure. I don't have to trust the post office or whether I put enough stamps on it. It's just in a box. So places like Colorado that have had successful vote center models also put a lot of drop-off centers throughout their jurisdiction, and it's just a box, and it could be a box at a library, at a shopping mall, or other convenient locations for people to put their ballot. Lastly, I do think that we should seriously talk about election consolidation. As Dean Logan starts to move us to a more modern voting system in Los Angeles County, now it becomes possible for us to finally move our cities onto a regular election cycle. The progressives, bless their hearts, when they passed this notion of moving city elections off cycle, frankly, let's just be honest, they had 2 things in mind. One was they had progressive ideals of trying to empower people at the local level, but they were also racist. They're the same people who were damned afraid of immigrants voting. They pushed for laws to take citizenship away from Chinese Americans. They didn't want certain people to vote. They were successful. Look at Los Angeles City, look at Los Angeles County. When we have so many off-year elections, look at who doesn't vote. I will just say that I think that there are a lot of things that we could do to really tweak this system, but I think the bigger issues that we need to ask ourselves are, how do we create a culture of civic participation? And so I do also want to agree with Mona as well as Secretary Padilla. I think we need to invest and think hard about civics education, not just one semester in the senior year, not just 4th grade building missions out of beans, right? I think that curriculum change is hard because it means that you got to get into a big debate about what's testable and whatnot. So let me put out a small idea. As a 3rd grade mom, one of the things that I've discovered is that parents have a lot of ability to bring assemblies to schools without a whole lot of red tape. We can bring people who do drumming and people who do, who teach anti-bullying, and we can dedicate, 2 hours of class time to just talking about those issues. If we paired up parents with our registrars to bring election assemblies or voting assemblies or civic participation assemblies to our elementary, middle school, and high schools, and we created some toolkits for people to just download and use. You could see that spread like wildfire. And it doesn't all have to be run by our registrars. I think a lot of citizens can take it up and bring it to their schools. So what I would say is let's find ways to empower people who are excited about elections to share that excitement with fellow citizens. But let's also make sure that the people who are in charge of running elections, like Dean Logan, have the resources that they need to do it. Thank you.